Mother Nature, Mother Nature, she's gonna get you. Yeah, she's gonna get you. Mother Nature, she's grown to hate you, and she's gonna get you. Gonna get you, you betcha.
Last on the Progressive Radio Network. It's NBL on PRN.FM. This October 6, 2020 edition, episode 143 of Nature Bats Last, comes to you pre-recorded from Rakino Island in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also Florida, Central Florida in the United States. This is Kevin Hester, and I'm joined by my co-host, Professor Guy McPherson. In addition, we have a guest for today's pre-recorded show. Guy, will you do the honors, please?
We are delighted to have the inimitable Sam Carana on today's show. We submitted written questions to Carana. Our frequent co-host, Pauline Schneider, will be supplying the voice of Dr. Carana. You can find Carana's blog at arctic-news.blogspot.com. That's arctic-news.blogspot.com. Dr. Carana posts anonymously about abrupt, irreversible climate change. To preserve his anonymity, we will refer to her as female, Sam, and Dr. Carana. A caveat is in order. In doing so, we are acknowledging our respect for Carana's work, and we are not indicating Carana's credentials or gender. Dr. Carana, welcome to Nature Bats Last on the Progressive Radio Network. Carana in the form of Pauline today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today.
I have a series of pretty quick questions that I think should generate fairly short answers, and so we'll start with some rudimentary information. How long have you been disseminating information about abrupt climate change to the public under the Sam Carana moniker?
I've been worried about abrupt global warming for a long time, and as time went by, I only became more worried about it. I was stunned to see that when Hurricane Katrina hit the U.S. in 2005, little action followed on climate change. If I had to pick a year when I became particularly active on abrupt climate change, it would be 2007. I wrote a post in early 2007 with the title, 10 Dangers of Global Warming. I mentioned tipping points and the possibility that global warming could drive humans into extinction. In particular, as more animals and plants that humans depend on would disappear. In 2007, I also wrote, 10 recommendations to deal with global warming. I started more blogs and groups that year, partially as an inventory and partially as a way to encourage discussion. In 2007, I also started to recommend local feebates as the best way to make a difference. In September 2007, I was shocked to see Arctic sea ice fall to a new record low. At that time, I was also looking at how much methane there is in the Arctic Ocean. In those days, few people were worried about loss of Arctic sea ice, let alone that they were worried about eruptions of methane from the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean, or that they were making links between the two.
And I should point out that 2007 data point, at the time the lowest ice cover recorded, was the last data point Maslovsky and colleagues used in their 2012 paper in the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences. And they used a linear projection based on that information with relatively few data points, and so that 2007 point dragged the rest down and led to an incorrect, too soon projection of 2016 plus or minus 3 years for an ice-free Arctic. But I don't think they missed by too much, by the way. Okay, next question. Why do you provide this information anyway?
How could I not want to share this? It's the most important issue we're all facing, and it's getting very little attention, which makes it self-obvious for me to present the information in the way that I do, quickly, concisely, and with links that point at sources, and without diversions and without distractions. That's also why I share information on a free blog without asking fees and without advertising. If you care about the message, then you want people to hear about it. So you don't need to get paid to share the message, and you want to reach people without hurdles or diversions. This is something that affects everyone, so the reasons to share it are contained in the message. I feel compelled to share what worries me. After all, it's the most important message ever posted, and there is so much urgency to act on the unfolding catastrophe, which could soon leave us no time or room to act at all.
Okay, fair enough. But why do you provide this information anonymously?
If anonymous means that no author name is added, then I am doing the opposite. I actually do like to add the name Sam Carana when I create content, and I also like to add links to sources. That makes it easy to find things back, so to see in what context they were used in, etc. But I understand what you mean. I don't like to add further details because I want people to focus on the message rather than on the person who happens to be carrying the message. Adding personal details can result in diversions that can in turn delay the necessary action. Also, I do welcome discussion. When I post on Facebook, people can easily comment and make suggestions, and this can lead to changes that can be made quickly, often instantly. Communication can be quick and direct. I mean, it's easy to take part in discussions on Facebook. There's no need to go through bureaucratic processes or to be wealthy or to be part of an elite or a privileged group, so that makes it more democratic.
Before we recorded this interview a couple or 3 weeks ago, we put out a request to the Nature Bats Last group on Facebook for questions. And Joey Casey submitted this question from that group. Will oceans evaporate? What sort of state do you see Earth becoming in the long term?
That's the threat if things keep going as they are now. Earth will become similar to Venus.
Well, that's kind of a bummer. You rarely submit to interviews. Why did you agree to join us in this on-air conversation?
Just as a note, these questions were sent to Sam previously. Okay. This is Pauline speaking now. Okay, now I'm reverting back to Sam. Just like you, I like to look at the bigger picture. Our conclusions are based on scientific findings, and we clearly reference those findings and add links to original sources. And we both have to conclude that there are huge threats. Threats of such a magnitude, severity, and imminence that they make me think, quote, "This should be front page news every day," end quote. Yet what happens is this: events are downplayed in the media, or they get little or no attention at all. This has now been going on for well over a decade, even as the problems are escalating before our very own eyes. We're all demanding honesty on issues of this importance, so it feels good to be among people who do see the importance of such issues and events and who are familiar enough with them, as well as with my posts, to seriously discuss things and comment on my work. So I have been looking forward to this conversation.
Now we'll revert to some of the questions that I had for Sam. Have you noticed any evidence of climate change research data being tampered with?
Not so much tampering with data, but what I see a lot is misrepresentation of the data, downplaying of the implications, or simply ignoring things altogether. Most people will never look into the data. Many only read headlines of news reports, or not even that. Politicians have also blocked a lot of research that could have provided precious data that we now lack. This has contributed to the dire situation we're in now, and there still are few data on, say, methane releases in the Arctic. What is also lacking is research into possible action to improve the situation. I have long suggested that politicians who inadequately act on the unfolding climate catastrophe should be brought before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the Netherlands.
As we watch the collapse of the Arctic sea ice and the meandering jet streams, how concerned are you about further disruption to the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation?
One of the biggest dangers I see is that a cool freshwater lid is growing on top of the surface of the North Atlantic near the Arctic Ocean, and that this is sealing off hot water underneath the sea surface from the atmosphere. Slowing down of AMOC will result in an increasing amount of hot water accumulating underneath the surface. As storms grow stronger, chances increase that a sudden inflow of hot, salty water will enter the Arctic Ocean and reach sediments at the seafloor that contain huge amounts of methane.
And I should point out that AMOC, sometimes called AMOC, is the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Circulation. So our visitors, our listeners,
Yes.
might not be aware of that. So that's an important circulation pattern in the Atlantic Ocean.
Recently, there's been a concerted attack on the seminal work of Professor Peter Wadhams, especially on the subject of the methane bomb hypothesis. Do you have any doubt at all that this is a real threat?
Politicians and news media are often ignoring the temperature rise or downplaying the dangers. Instead, the precautionary principle should be applied, and this should be applied on 3 dimensions to issues such as methane eruptions from the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. The first dimension is a matter of magnitude and severity. A vast amount of methane is held in sediments. If just a tiny part of this methane will erupt, this could wipe out humanity, if not make all life on Earth go extinct, due to the huge immediate global warming potential of methane and due to the numerous feedbacks. The second dimension is probability. Methane hydrates destabilize as temperature rises. So, as temperatures continue to rise, the likelihood grows that such eruptions of methane will occur. The third dimension is imminence. The longer we wait, the more urgent the threat becomes, as the temperature rise doesn't wait for us.
I want to back up just a little bit and have the 3 of us discuss, and I'm sorry that Sam isn't here to contribute further to the conversation, but that's the nature of the beast when we have a recorded show in which he's submitting written responses. And Sam indicates that there's not so much, quote, not so much tampering with data. And in response to Kevin's question, have you noticed any evidence of climate change research data being tampered with? Not so much tampering with data, but what I see a lot is misrepresentation of the data, downplaying of the implications, or simply ignoring things altogether. Most people never look into the data, that's certainly true. Many only read headlines and news reports, or not even that. So, Kevin, I think you had something specific and important in mind when you asked that question. Can you follow up?
We're at the mercy of the same corporations and institutions that are collecting this data as to what they're going to give us. As the situation becomes more dire and more tenuous, I think we need to question all of that information more and more. I'll give you one example, is that in 2012, Nick Breeze interviewed Dr. Natalia Shakova, and her partner, Dr. Igor Semiletov, are two of the most experienced Arctic researchers that I know of, including Peter Wadhams and Jason Box.
So everything looks anomalous, even from our experience from this 10 years. Everything looks anomalous, and this is what makes him thinking that, making him think that the worst thing might happen.
When she was in that interview, she teared up as she was telling us about the existential danger that the methane hydrates threaten. This extraordinarily experienced scientist teared up, and that reflected how dangerous that she thought the situation was then, 8 years ago. And then since that went public and went viral to a degree as well, Dr. Shakova has really stepped back. She doesn't do any interviews. Her research papers, there's not much coming out, and I think when it is, it's coming out perhaps under Dr. Igor Semiletov's name, and I just think she backed up completely because of that. And we saw a similar thing happen with Jason Box afterwards. Jason Box put out a tweet one time saying that if the methane is released from the Arctic, we're fucked. And then he completely has backed up.
In fact, he said if only a small fraction of the methane is released, we're fucked. So yeah. It's even more dire than you just indicated. And you're absolutely right. Since then, he's been backpedaling as if he was looking over a cliff.
I think in a lot of ways, you come into what's happened to you personally comes into this equation for all the other scientists. You put your head above the parapet and said, we're in major trouble. And all you got for it was shit and abuse and attack, which is exactly how this patriarchy works. If the patriarchy doesn't agree with what you're saying, it smashes you because it's trying to keep itself alive as long as it can, like a leech living off a dependent organism. So I think what happened to you is made a whole lot of other scientists much more circumspect about delivering their message.
Right, and we mentioned Shakova earlier, Dr. Natalia Shakova, and she mentioned the possibility of a 50 gigaton burst of methane being highly likely for abrupt release at any time. And a year or two later, when asked about that, she said she never said it. Well, you can find the abstract still for the European Geophysical meeting, European Geophysical Union meeting in Europe from 2008 when she said that. The abstract is still right there. She clearly, in the presentation and in the abstract, indicated that such an event was highly likely for abrupt release at any time. Mm-hmm. And then later, she lied. She just flat out lied. She didn't retract the proper scientific approach would have been to retract the statement, which would have involved all of her co-authors in that presentation and in that abstract agreeing to retract. But she didn't. She just said she never said such a thing. Well, you can look still 12 years later and find out that in fact she did say such a thing. It's easy to do that internet search and find it. So,
Well, this is Pauline speaking. I think she did that deliberately. I think she would have said we were mistaken if she wanted people to stop looking. But I think the fact that she just said a blatant lie that would be easily discovered was basically telling people, I'm being told to lie. You can find the information on your own. It's there. And I think, I mean, look, you know, the Russians have learned for many decades to read between the lines. Americans still don't know how to do that. I don't know about the rest of the European countries, but Russians know how to read between the lines. And she was trying to teach us how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important observation. I'll just make one point that I did hear. Peter Wadhams was interviewed on Environmental Coffee House, and he said when the subject of the 50 gigaton methane release, he said hundreds of gigatons, not 50. He thinks it's a lot more, not less.
Yeah.
and he points that out on a YouTube channel that gets relatively little attention. And I suspect as a consequence, he doesn't get a lot of negative attention for making statements such as that. Not that in my mind he should be particularly concerned. What's he got to lose?
He doesn't get not a lot of negative attention. That changed recently.
Right.
By a cowboy outfit called Scientists Warning, who had some adolescents who weren't scientists, who were just researchers like me, but adolescent ones, and they completely attacked the methane hypothesis. There's huge amounts of peer-reviewed data to tell us that it exists. So
well,
I think there is a concerted campaign, and it will get worse. Every single analog is getting worse, so the attacks will get worse as well.
Right. And I feel like we're taking time away from the original topic, but I can't let this go. If Scientists Warning is not a deep state operation, then I can't imagine what it is. Because every time I receive an email message from Mark Austin, who claims to be, and almost certainly is, an NSA contracted spy, every time I receive an email message from him, the first person who receives the email message is Stuart Scott. Always. Every single time. It doesn't even matter what the subject is. And Stuart Scott is part of the group doing hit pieces on me. He asked me to submit to an interview with him, so I did, an audio interview that lasted several hours. And he cut it down to 2 short pieces, extracting only the parts that made me look like I was in agreement with him or that I didn't look particularly intelligent. And I asked him about it later, and he ran screaming from the room, which is no particular surprise. Anyway, so I think that's very disappointing on the part of Scientists Warning and the what I believe is an obvious connection with Mark Austin, the NSA contracted spy, under obviously an alias, Mark Austin.
Every single analog is heading in the wrong direction. There's re-rising fascism everywhere we go. The situation is incredibly dire. It can only be that they will try and manipulate every situation that they can. The last 2 world wars were started with false flags. So of course psyops will be used to try and control this narrative.
Right.
They have to keep the people calm.
I think the control of Extinction Rebellion that emanated out of the UK is really quite possibly a division of that. And I am not attacking the people who are on the streets and who are trying to do anything. But what I will attack is the modus operandi. And that is that they're trying to say to people, oh, if we just go out and protest in a slightly different way, it will make it different. Excuse me, these protests are happening in the car, driven by Thelma and Louise, after it went off the cliff.
Right. And not only that, the first demand they make, Extinction Rebellion, is complete honesty by the government. Oh yeah, that's going to happen.
Well,
when has any government been honest about almost anything? I can't even imagine that's your first demand and that you're actually counting on that.
Right.
That's insane.
Well, Pauline here again. I think that what the deep state does, or the governments of the world do, is they find these small grassroots groups that do seem to have some promise and are going in the direction that they want them to go into, and then they support them or steer them further into the direction they want them to go into. And if they start veering off, then they cut them off. For example, if you just look at all the little movements throughout the last 3 decades, the ones that ended up being successful were ridiculous. The ones that failed were actually on the right track, and I'm talking about Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street was making a difference. It was actually teaching people how to work laterally rather than this normal hierarchical pyramid that we're used to. And we gotta have a daddy on the top telling us what to do. We need daddy to protect us, to take care of us. That's garbage. Every anarchist, every agricultural anarchist for millennia knows that's garbage. We know that's garbage. We don't need a daddy. You don't need a daddy to tell us the right from wrong. As a group of people that care about each other, we know how to take care of each other. But corporations don't want us to do that because they want to monetize all of that.
Okay, I'm going to ask the final question for our guest, Sam Carana. And Pauline, you can give the lengthy response.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will open up some more doors for the three of us to discuss.
Okay, let me turn back into Sam Carana coming back again.
How would you like to see humanity respond to the predicament of abrupt, irreversible climate change?
I like everyone to take a good look at how dire the situation is and to act with integrity and compassion. The climate plan that I recommend focuses on government action and prefers implementation through local fee-baits. Here are the 10 principles behind the climate plan. 1. The precautionary principle, which should be applied broadly and on 3 dimensions, as I pointed out before. So, regarding severity, probability, and imminence, this should lead to action, not inaction, and such action should aim to reduce the dangers. Number 2, relevance. The media often ignore climate change and seek to divert attention to trivial matters. In my posts, I deliberately point at issues that are often overlooked or downplayed, yet that can be extremely relevant in regard to climate change, especially from the perspective of the precautionary principle. In posts, I typically conclude that the situation is dire and calls for immediate, comprehensive, and effective action. Number 3, science. Where there is doubt, science-based analysis should be undertaken, and this should include more scientific research where needed. Research should be relevant and to the point. It should continue on an ongoing basis, and it should incorporate the importance of the precautionary principle. Where more scientific research is needed, this should not be interpreted as a reason to delay action, as that would violate the precautionary principle. Number 4, healthcare workers typically pledge to, quote, do no harm, unquote. Politicians at the Paris Agreement also pledged to avoid harm. Again, this principle should not be interpreted as a reason to remain passive and to delay action. The precautionary principle makes it imperative for action to be taken. So I like to go one step further and interpret this principle as health is good. Number 5, global agreement, local implementation. It's great to have global agreement, but implementation can best take place locally. Each community should reach of their targets independently and genuinely, i.e., without buying or fabricating offsets or credits domestically or abroad. If not, action from government in the respective area and beyond should follow. Number 6, democracy. Each individual should take responsibility and be given that responsibility. This means people need to be well informed and made conscious of their responsibility. Where people still don't bother to act responsibly, local feebates can help everyone becoming effective in combating climate change. Number 7, open information. Share information to enable people to make decisions. I like to make people think. I welcome discussion. Unlike politicians who take decisions out of the hands of people, I like people to decide for themselves, and I like that to be a well-informed and thought-through decision. Number 8, money should not overrule our lives. We should not trade away our principles. Feebates do not necessarily have to be financial. For example, if a local council adds extra fees to rates for land where soil carbon falls, while using all the revenues for rebates on rates for land where soil carbon rises, then biochar effectively becomes the currency that can help improve the soil's fertility, its ability to retain water, and to support more vegetation. That way, real assets are built. Number 9, the preeminence of principle. While it would be nice if there will be a good outcome, we should base our actions on principle. We should act because it is the right thing to do. Number 10, keep an open mind. Be prepared for the unexpected. Be prepared to change your mind if needed. Keep discussing and reconsidering these principles. I've learned that there is still a lot to be learned and discovered. So, that is all. That concludes Sam Carana's responses to our questions. Thank you, Sam, very much.
So, Kevin, did you want to respond, or did you want me to throw the first stone?
Yeah, I would like to respond to the climate plan. What the climate plan shows is how compassionate, empathetic, and considerate Sam Carana is, and how sane. This is the climate plan is the sort of thing you would use or impose in a sane society. But this society is not sane. This culture is insane. I like to often quote Jiddu Krishnamurti, quote, hang on a second, I've had a quick mental block the minute I went to pull it up. There's no sign of good health, there's no sign of good health to be a well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Right.
I'm sorry I butchered that, but this shows that it sums up how we got into the situation we're in. It is a profoundly sick culture that has been imposed on most of the people of the world and all of the other organisms, both flora and fauna. So it should be no surprise to us that we've ended up where we are.
Yeah.
When you consider the pathology that runs the economic system on this planet.
Right. Now that you said it, I think the correct quote goes like this: it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. In any event, that's exactly where we are. This is a profoundly sick society. The links between governments and corporations have been clearly illustrated for more than 100 years. The existence of a shadowy group of characters in the United States and probably beyond, and their influence on governmental decisions has been described for more than 50 years by reliable sources. And all of this indicates that we do not have an empathetic, compassionate group of people who are making significant decisions. So that's my biggest issue with the climate plan. On the surface, these 10 steps make perfect sense. But we don't have a society that would allow for implementation of such a plan. I don't know how long Sam has been proposing the climate plan, but it's been a while. It's been long enough that the occasional billionaire knows about it. In fact, they probably all know about it because this is how they make and hold on to their billions, is through knowledge. So surely a bunch of people like Bezos and Buffett and Gates know about the climate plan, and they choose to put their money elsewhere. Probably because they know that the climate plan cannot possibly be implemented, and also allow them to retain their enormous privilege.
I think the responses from the billionaires on the planet to this crisis is indicative of how bad it is. They're talking about going to another uninhabitable planet.
Yeah.
For pity's sake, these people collectively have trillions of dollars. If money could fix this predicament, there actually is enough money.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
could all chip in, whatever it took, if money could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that ship sailed many decades.
Yes, yes. And not only that, these are the folks who, we'll say, have the ear of the governments. If it just meant creating money, which is what we do every day out of thin air, then we would create the money for it, wouldn't we? So I don't think this is a monetary issue at all. I think this is an ethical issue, a profoundly ethical issue that as a consequence the society will not address, because the society is overwhelmingly controlled by sociopaths and psychopaths.
Yeah, that was what I was going to interject. It's a mental health issue.
Absolutely.
These people are very ill. They are very unwell. They're pathologically unwell. And they have their hand on the steering wheel, the accelerator, and the detonator button. People just need to understand how dire the predicament is and how important. Another thing about the climate plan is about looking after each other.
Right.
This is what we've been advocating the whole time that we've been along this journey.
Absolutely.
These are good old days. Now, they're going away rapidly.
Absolutely. Sam makes a statement about healthcare workers typically pledging to do no harm, and politicians at the Paris Agreement also pledged to avoid harm. I was sent a paper today, and I immediately threw it in the garbage, the email garbage, never to be seen again, because the paper in the peer-reviewed literature was indicating that if the global average temperature rises from 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline, then we're going to be in trouble. As if that hasn't already happened many years ago. And so here again is the complete disconnect between the compassion shown by the climate plan of Sam Carana and the reality of what's happening out there in the world.
Sponsored by the world's governments.
Of course, sponsored by the world's governments.
But another thing that discussion you just mentioned brings up is the peer-reviewed literature ignoring the inertia in the climate system. There is a massive lag between how many of the emissions that are in the atmosphere and where we're at today. Talking about 1.5 or 2 C is complete bullshit, because if you go back to 1750, we're already there. But also, if there's a lot of warming, anthropogenic warming before that, just with agriculture and civilization and burning of things. So there's a whole lot of that being ignored. So that just goes to show how institutionalized the peer-reviewed system is.
Right, absolutely. Okay, I want to take just another quick look or two at the climate plan. Item 6, democracy. Each individual should take responsibility and be given that responsibility. Okay, this means people need to be well informed and made conscious of their responsibility. Pauline, would you care to comment on the notion of democracy and when it was most
Birthed?
when it was birthed, how long it lasted, and how important it was at its time?
So we all know that Greece is famous for being the cradle of democracy, but I think very few people realize that it didn't last very long there. It lasted maybe 10 years. The idea of democracy is different. What is it that you always say? The idea, something in action or in reality is different from the...
Oh, right. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is.
So in practice, in theory it was a wonderful idea, and it was really, I think it worked for a little bit, but humans are like cats, and it's like herding cats, and I do appreciate this, because actually what she meant to write is anarchy. So in anarchy, each individual does accept responsibility, not only for themselves, but for the people around them. That's what anarchy is. Democracy is everybody gets a vote, everybody gets a voice, and we just throw all that into the kitty, and you're going to have a mess. And we see that in this country every day. We have a mess of voices. Nobody cares about other people. It's all about me, me, me. But she's actually talking about true anarchy, which is people being together, responsibly educated in the facts.
Well, Edward Abbey wrote frequently about the correspondence between anarchism and democracy. And he basically said they're the same thing. Do we need more democracy? You bet your sweet Betsy, he says, through anarchism.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everyone has to understand how the word democracy is very, very old. But the version that we have now, this contemporary version, has been bastardized by the monetary system and the corporations. Oh. When I hear the word democracy now, it makes me puke.
Yeah.
Because look at the democracy that you have in the United States. It is the very best democracy that money can buy.
Right.
And if you've got the money, you own it.
Right, exactly.
Or as Paul and Anne Ehrlich wrote in their book, One with Nineveh, many years ago, what we have in this country is socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor.
Wow.
Because under capitalism, the poor don't make out very well. Never have.
Right.
So we socialize any corporation that might come close to failing if it's owned by a 1%er. And that's been a point of the videos we've been putting out most mornings lately, is that the links between governments and wealthy people and the corporations they own are solid. The links between the governments and small businesses owned by mom and pop on the corner, they aren't nearly so strong.
Yep.
It's a tragedy.
Yep.
I'll give you an indication of how corrupt it's become in New Zealand. James Shaw is the co-leader of the Green Party in New Zealand. Their policy on their website is that they're opposed to private schooling. Just recently he signed off on a gift of $12 million to one private school in New Zealand.
Wow,
The
that's
head of
interesting.
the Green Party of New Zealand is an economist. That most people will know about a guy called William Nordhaus, who was an economist, who set the 2C Rubicon for where we shouldn't cross. It had no basis in science. Zero. It was all basis on what he thought capitalism could get away with. He got a Nobel Peace Prize for that. These are pathological psychopaths who are making these decisions. Go on, Guy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he made that statement in 1977. We've learned a little bit about climate change since 1977, and he was given the Peace Prize last year, right? 2019?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in those ensuing 60-some years, we actually learned quite a lot about climate change. Sorry, 40-some years.
Yeah. But, this is how Orwellian it has become.
Yeah.
You know, he got a Peace Prize for guaranteeing the extinction of most of all, if not all, complex life on this planet. And you had a president in your country that got a Peace Prize for dropping more bombs than anyone else before him.
To be fair, he received the Peace Prize before he dropped all those bombs.
Yeah, that was the deal.
Exactly. Okay, I want to make a comment on item 7 of the climate plan. Open information. Share information to enable people to make decisions. I like to make people think. I welcome discussion. Unlike politicians who take decisions out of the hands of people, I like people to decide for themselves, and I like that to be a well-informed and well-thought-through decision. Well, he says it right there in item 7. I like to make people think. Unlike politicians who take decisions out of the hands of people. Governments don't like people to think. It's really bad for the government when people think. Look at the American Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s. It posed a serious threat to the government, to the continuation of life as normal, to the sociopaths, the millionaires at the time, that was a lot of money, who were pulling the strings of empire in the United States. We can't have people thinking. That's the worst thing ever to happen to any oligarchy of a country. And so that's just not going to happen, Sam. I'm sorry. I appreciate these great ideas, but the implementation, I just don't see it ever happening in this country or any country in the world, because governments throughout the world have pretty much revealed themselves to be all headed in the same direction, which is the direction that the really wealthy people want the country to go.
Which is for them to get more rich.
That expression that you used when we first met, that we're born into captivity. Just like most of the living organisms or animals on this planet are born into captivity.
That's right.
I read a report the other day that said that we've lost 68%. Sorry, we've lost 68% of the wildlife on the planet. 68% of the wildlife on the planet in the last 50 years. And of course, most of that would have been in the last 10 of that 50.
Right. And it's accelerating. But as we've discussed many times, the exponential function is something difficult for us to wrap our minds around, any of us, because we are not hardwired that way. Evolution by natural selection did not in any way set us up to deal with the exponential function, to understand it by any stretch of the imagination.
No. And it is ironic that because of our innate nature to be altruistic, that we have allowed sociopaths to survive and to take over, because our altruistic nature always gives people the benefit of the doubt and believes in the better angels. And unfortunately, we have, in the last 6 millennia, changed everything. That doesn't work anymore for us. Once we industrialized, once we went into cities and created, leaders, kings, priests, gods. That was
county commissioners.
Yeah, county commissioners. We are right.
I believe that capitalism is a vortex of sociopathy and psychopathy to the top. So the longer it went on, of course, the more unwell and sick the leadership would be. And that's where we're at. We're, New Zealand, the Green Party members in New Zealand voted an economist to be their co-leader. It's like voting for death.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
right.
I guess the vote there for all of us is quick or painful.
Quick or painful?
The death, since we're voting for death.
Well, I think that, I understand, that a lot of our conversations look at all of these ideas and suggestions about what we could do to save our butts. And, we're able to, really critically think our way through them with actual analysis that shows that this is not going to happen. It hasn't happened in the last 40 years that we've been asking for these things to happen. They haven't happened yet. Einstein reminds us, if you keep repeating the same thing and expect a different result, that's the, definition of insanity. What could we do, though? There are things that we could do. Maybe not to save our butts, but maybe to have a gentler landing or crash or fall or whatever you want to call it, off the edge. Every day we're dealing with people who are homeless or houseless. Every day we're dealing with people who are suffering from terrible diseases that they didn't ask for. Every day people are losing their families, they're losing their jobs, their homes. I feel like what we could ask our governments to do is to address that. That would be a real thing they could do. Instead, in this country, people still have this idea that you can lift yourself up by your bootstraps. And we've known from history, anyone with any sociological background knows that's not a real thing.
That's virtually impossible.
Doesn't happen. Nobody gets it, not even the billionaires. They have not gotten there by their bootstraps. They've gotten there on the backs of people. And
they make money the old-fashioned way. They inherit it. That's the way it works. And I'd like to spend a few minutes. First, I want to make sure that we're done wrapping up the conversation for today, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about Ken Avador, next month's guest.
Yes.
And put out the call to our listeners for questions for an artist.
That'd be great. We have 5 minutes left in our show, so we totally have time to do that.
So Ken Avador is a wonderful artist. He has published at least two books that I've seen, books of graphic arts, and he has a YouTube channel. And he puts out the most poignant videos. I just watched one called The Nose or A Nose or Following the Nose. I can't remember what it, within the last 3 or 4 days. That's my mind going rapidly now. And just 5 minutes, so poignant, so sad, such a great message that he put out in a short period of time. This is what artists do. Artists cause you to think differently. Artists are not crafts. Art is not craft. Craftspeople are not artists. Craftspeople build chairs and tables, and they're beautiful, and maybe even guitars. Artists change the way you think about something, change your emotions. So, sorry, I went off on a little ramble there. Does either of you have a thought about Ken Avador, our next guest for the November show?
Kevin?
Everyone go to Ken's YouTube channel and look at the wonderful presentations that he's made, and a couple on extinction. He's a very, very talented man.
Yes, and I have watched his videos over the last few years, and they're wonderful. They're he's a sketch artist and does beautiful work, and he has done a wonderful sketch of Guy, so it's of course dear to my heart. But I really appreciate that he's think he's done the emotional work on this, and it's pretty tough stuff. And a lot of people can't go there. It takes a lot of time and meditation to understand what near-term human extinction is, and I think he's done a really, really good job of it, and I think he's depicted it quite fairly.
Interestingly, he has a couple of daughters, and when he put out his 2001 book, he indicated in the book that we were going extinct in the near term, like 70 years. And that shouldn't come as any surprise. That's what almost everybody I talk to does, is they put it just at the end of their life.
Right.
Or just beyond the end of their natural life.
Right.
And so it wasn't a particular surprise to him when he came across my work, and he realized that he'd been off by a few decades. It's still not bad, really. He's an artist. And is not what he spends his time thinking about, obviously, or conducting research on. His YouTube channel is called Bicycleopolis. It's spelled like bicycle, except instead of ending with an E, bicycle with an E, it ends with opolis, as in metropolitan area, opolis. So Bicycleopolis.
Yeah, Opolis.
And it's a wonderful channel if you haven't checked it out. It's well worth spending some time there. And we'll be doing that show live, so we'll be taking your comments and questions throughout the show. So take a look at some of Ken Avador's work and be prepared to fire questions at us. That'll make for a very interesting conversation, I think.
Yeah, people can ask about this.
We have more artists who are on this journey to chip in. So any of the artists who follow our show, I'd love for them to call in and be a part of it.
Exactly. And his technique is so interesting and unique and quite beautiful. And he does, before the pandemic, they would go out in groups of artists to sketch the city and cafes and various sites where he lives, and they're wonderful. If you followed him on Instagram, they're quite beautiful. The work is shared, and it's fantastic. So it's a lot of fun.
He lives in pretty much the middle of the United States, Indiana, in a large city. So he has access to a lot of artists, like-minded people, and it's also a beautiful location.
Yep.
So,
I think we're ready.
Why don't you take us home, Kevin?
Thanks for listening to today's pre-recorded show. You can catch NBL on PRN on the first Tuesday afternoon of each month at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The next episode is scheduled to broadcast live on November 3rd in the United States with Ken Avador as our guest. If you missed the broadcast, you can find the shows at the archives at prn.fm, the Podbean, or at Stitcher, and feel free to rate us on iTunes. Also, continue to follow the Nature Bat's last blog, guymcpherson.com, for further updates, interviews, and speaking tours, and you can keep current with my work at kevinhester.live. Thanks again to our guest Sam Carana, our listeners, and also to Afrazine for his music. Until next time, remember the dominant culture has been clever, been very clever, but in the end,
Nature Bats last.
She bats last and she's coming out swinging. She bats last and she's just about taking all that she can take. And it's payback time. It's payback time. I said it's payback time. It's payback time.
So far, the world has become a worse and worse place. Every year we have